Welcome to the Next Patient podcast, where we're exploring the real challenges and opportunities facing today's leader in the physical therapy and rehab clinic industry. I'm your host, Mariani Alza, and today I'm joined by Tamara Williams from Energetic Wellness Center. Tamara, it's great to have you on the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Of course, it's my pleasure. And to kick things off, why don't you go ahead and share a bit about how you first got into the overall health and wellness industry and what led you to actually grow and launch Energetic Wellness?
Awesome. So I do have a really wide history with the healthcare industry, if you will. I graduated with a cell and molecular biology degree for my bachelor's, and then I also explored healthcare management within, call it the Canadian system or the Canadian ecosystem. And that allowed me to really understand how policies were being made, what it looked like in terms of healthcare, since healthcare here in Canada is considered free. And so I started within the pharmaceutical industry. And then my last real professional venture was introduced to digital health information and transformation. So we went through the whole era of what does technology look like within patient care, being able to utilize that for continuation of care beyond hospital. So really a community approach and allowing people to have access to care at home, right? So that our real ecosystem, our hospitals are not being bombarded with individuals who could, receive care at home from a nurse, so on and so forth. So that led me to really explore informatics and the needs to connect all these various different, call it systems within the infrastructure. So it looks like, electronic health records, being able to support physicians or the clinical team with making decisions in terms of automating, right? A lot of people want to talk about AI and automation. So I was at the forefront of looking at how do we connect all these different systems that exist already within healthcare and one just reduce the cost, right? Because you already have systems in place, but they're not talking to each other. And that also meant that the clinical practitioners, the clinical teams didn't have information readily available to make decisions. And so my first task or challenge was really to see if we can build various different clinical decisions. So really clinical decision support. If, a patient presents themselves at the doctor's office, they have these symptoms, what would be the next steps in terms of even ordering the blood work, the diagnostic testing, so that the doctor has more information. Now, what happens, and in the world of AI and automation, it's going, okay, well, when we know we're going to get, there's a 98% chance that this is what the result is, and they present themselves with X, Y, and Z, what's the next step? And this is where I would build specific clinical decision, let's call them I call them mechanisms, if you will, but things that are in place so that the team isn't waiting for this data to make a decision for the patient, right? And if you look in the grand scheme of things from a government standpoint, everyone's living longer, but we're living longer with more complex problems and situations. So before in the past, we didn't have to worry about, someone living past 80. Now it's you're living to 100, but you also have another 20 years of chronic disease, pain, inflammation, and then the government again has to be able to mitigate the secondary or adverse effects that might present themselves just from those situations. In hindsight, though, government doesn't have more money to take care of that. And so then you see the increase and the risk of like death or secondary comorbidities that impact the patient, but also the government because that's our budget. And working through that, I realized, and then of course we lived through the pandemic and all these different things, which if these systems were already connected in hindsight, we would be able to act a lot faster than what we had to react to during the pandemic itself. And so all this to be said that in 2017, I went through my own personal experience working with a holistic practitioner. And that was the first time that I realized what I want to see in terms of healthcare, which is prevention. We do a lot of treating and reacting to symptoms, but then it costs a lot in the long run for the individual and the healthcare system. What I believe and was hoping when I went to school is that there was a lot of work to be done for health prevention. How do we educate our patients to take their health more seriously and under their control? and keep them accountable to the different ways that they're technically making an impact on the healthcare system, right? Um, I don't know about you, but I come from a generation where my parents would say, when I get sick, I'm going to the doctor and then they'll take care of me. Only then will I address the situation. Though in hindsight, they may be in pain for already 10, 15, 20 years. They just never realized it. Um, and so going through that experience and realizing that everything I believed in terms of healthcare prevention and helping people be more in control with just the basics and not being caught up in all the data that they have access to today, and really going through the laundry list of all the fad diets, you name it, and we get lost in that. It's just bringing it back down to the basics. And I think if we focused on the basics, it already improves the quality of life of individuals so much better than the fad, something that works for now and then stops, right? um, so when I had that experience with my own mentor, who's now my mentor, because that changed my whole entire path. I went back to school in 2017, which, having a family and a very high demanding, high profile professional career meant that I was going to school part-time for 6 years. I took another year to do my thesis, which I studied or yeah, explored a lot of the impact of TMJ dysfunction, whether on posture and or stress management. That's a little bit of the door that opened in terms of how much just TMJ dysfunction has an impact on regulating your nervous system. So I decided to go back to school, became an osteopath. I then started to start seeing clients or patients, which is different from how I was working then versus now. I've never touched a body. I wasn't even sure if it was possible. I didn't even like feet. And realizing that I had to touch a physical body, I was going, ooh, okay. Are you gifted or can I do it? And when he told me, no, I can definitely do it, I signed up literally maybe 6 months after my first experience with him, and I didn't look back. So all that to say, I curated Energetic Wellness Center, realizing that there's not enough safe places for people to go in and explore something different than what we consider typical Western medicine. And I like to say it's nothing new, right? The traditional Chinese medicine, functional medicine, you're in the States, so functional medicine is a real thing. Integrative health, alternative health, it's really a way that people cannot have to invest in these major biohacking techniques, if you will, to create longevity and vitality, when in essence, it's again just bringing it back to the basics, which research shows will definitely improve your overall health. So energetic wellness, the foundation or our mission is to really provide people with the tools and the resources that will open the door for them to explore physical therapy, manual therapy, and in this case, it's osteopathy, as well as the impact of stress and being mindful. Those three things together will allow them to reach the most fulfilling life, if you will. And then after that, it really is us introducing them to all the different ways that they could be more aware of what's going on inside their body, and taking an approach of healing the inside so that the outside, including the physical pain, is lessened. And that's where we get to really improve their quality of life. So we also, given my background from technology, my whole thing is, technology, a lot of people want to be afraid of it, but it really does provide a lot of data. My thing is follow the data, we'll have the answers, and that's what allows us to treat. I'm not even going to say treat, I take that back, allows us to identify the source of what they're feeling physically. And a lot of times it's one of those three things combined. And I always say, if you're not treating your mind or addressing what's going on top, then that is the pillar, because it's controlling everything in your body. So if somebody's really looking to put in place true self-healing, it really does encompass all of those three pillars. And I like to say that nothing that we do here is based on things that, I haven't done. If I didn't do it, I'm not putting it as a service on our list of services for our patients.
Right. You need to make sure that it's actually going to work before you just try it on somebody else. That'll work in
Exactly.
a lab experiment. That's looking at jack of all trades to streamline all the ways. to get us back to the roots, away from the Western medicine care. And you actually hit it right on the nail in terms of, yes, having a longer lifespan, but how long and how good of a life would that actually be in terms of quality? So that is fantastic. Again, using the AI being kind of one of the first founders to kind of go at it and use that in your actual approach, which is funny because then talking about your approach, I do want to go into kind of those three pillars. And obviously, we talked a little bit about it before, but you're going back to the roots, even to a trampoline, right?
Yes.
Going all the way back to what is good, trampolines. Talk to me about what and how you're using that rebound therapy and what, how does that tie into those roots and is that preventative care and what is those results looking like for your clinic?
Awesome. So rebound therapy in general the tool itself is a mini fitness trampoline.
Mhm.
You can't hide or dress that up any other way. But the actual practice of rebound therapy is basically rebounding creates not only just, yay, a fun way to work out, but in hindsight, if you look at the people who will stop moving, it's because they had either a bad traumatic experience, and I mean like trauma to the body. They might also have reduced mobility, or just chronic pain in general, which I would say if you don't feel good to move, you're not going to move.
Right.
And so what I love about rebounding, and it's a tool that existed even in the 70s from the UK, that's where the concept originated, and that's where my training and certification comes from. But the people who are using it the most were physiotherapists. And nowadays, most people will look at it as, wow, this is a great, fun, cool way to work out. I go, yes, amazing, great. But if you do fall in the people who are already restricted movement and their quality of life has already deteriorated because they're not moving, from an osteopath perspective, one of our, let's call it, our beliefs is that the body self-heal is able to heal itself. That being said, it also needs to ensure that there's no liquid that is not moving. So when we see liquid that is stagnant, then it opens the door to dis-ease, not disease, but dis-ease. And then people limit their movement because there's liquid there, and that liquid is technically inflammation. Now, what we can see or do with somebody who's limited in mobility and dealing with a lot of pain is that the center G force on a rebounder allows for the body to contract muscles that are not necessarily facilitated in any other exercise or utilizing any other tool. And that's why I love it, because the importance of walking isn't just because you're walking, but it's also because your feet is the proprioceptors that receive the information, and it does that whole contraction. I like to do this whole movement. But when there's nothing on the bottom in terms of the pump in the feet, liquid doesn't move, whether it's the lymphatics system, so the lymph, or just blood circulation. Those two things need to constantly be at movement.
Mm.
Rebounding just by pushing down into the mat, and that's the technique. You cannot jump like a trampoline park, which is great because that's what kids want to do. And then the second you get them to do it very concentrated, everyone realizes, whoa, this is not just a workout, but I'm feeling muscles that I've never felt before. And so coming back to your question, how can I help people? Yes, there's the mastermind of in incorporating osteo so that we can rebalance the body. I have access to work, more than just structural elements. I also like to say the visceral, because the organs inside is what is attached into the outside, right? So when people come back with chronic situations, it's no longer a question of, okay, maybe you physically had some trauma. It's no longer a question of restrictive movement. I'm going something inside which is no longer balanced or aligned, is creating some sort of resistance to the outside world. So if I want something to not come back, I address everything viscerally, and then I have the best results outside. Coming back to rebounding, that G force that we create down into the mat also stimulates things like your digestive system, right? So if I have a client who's wheelchair bound and definitely not moving, and any individual who had like neurodivergent individuals as well, that is the tool that I use to also stimulate the vestibular system, the proprioceptors. Yes, moving the liquids, but more than that, the liquids also carry, the chemical information that the body needs to communicate. So the neurotransmitters are also moving. So the endorphins are going, the serotonin to be happy is also moving. The GABA that I need in certain individuals, whether they're anxious or you name it, those are all the different things, and I'm listing like high level. But those are all the different things that I can still address in 5 minutes on a rebounder, right? So
Mhm.
somebody who says, I don't have time, well, you have 5 minutes.
Right.
But the approach is that you're identifying multiple different areas to improve at once rather than going, okay, you feel 20 symptoms, but you really only have one or two things that are out of balance that's creating the ripple effect. My approach is going, okay, well, let's address everything all at once and not overconsume the person. Rebounding then allows us to do all of those things. Now, even further than that, because I'm talking about like people who are special needs, neurodivergent, that's what rebound therapy really is targeted to. But beyond that, if we were to look at seniors, for example, right? Once upon a time, they were able to walk, they had balance, they had coordination. Life changes, they get older, they're no longer focusing on weight training to increase bone density. They're more at risk for falling, specifically because of the bone density issue, which, it could be because of hormones, right?
Right.
We haven't spoken about that, but it could definitely hormonal, and that's why women are more at risk than men, menopause. But when you look at all of those things, really what it means is that as your body transitioned in a different phase of life, you lost the basic things or the basic foundations in terms of balance, motor skills, sensory skills, and we're retraining that individual to be able to gain their strength to have balance. And so the difference is on a floor, there's no response coming back to that individual. They can
Mhm.
do it. But if they're seniors and they're already in pain and they have a walker or a cane, I can't convince them to want to do anything on the floor. Now, if we put them on a rebounder, it's very low impact. It reduces the feedback that you would have directly from the floor. And just by pushing, just having them with a bar pushing down into the mat and letting gravity take into full effect, I have now activated their pelvic floor muscles, their deep core muscles, which is what they need to stabilize and keep themselves balanced. And we didn't change their routine except just putting them on a trampoline. And most people think, oh my goodness, I can't possibly do that. But really, when the rebounder is there doing the majority of the work, I just need somebody to push into the mat, and then we have an impact for their balance and their coordination. And it stimulates, let's call it neuroplasticity, so that it retrains the brain to make these connections that are necessary, which as we get older naturally would be gone. So integrating it in all those different spheres allows a person to finally improve their quality of life. And at the same time, I didn't ask them to go and run a marathon, which they would totally say no to me anyways. So in hindsight, when I look at rebound therapy, it allows us to help neurodivergent individuals. It helps focus, concentration, the balance, the coordination. It will also, because it activates all the muscle groups, increases the bone density naturally for any individual. So then puts them less at risk as well for things like osteoporosis.
That's absolutely so, so cool. And you touched a lot on mindfulness and kind of that mind-body connection, right? Obviously, that's one of our first big pillars, that
Yes.
mindfulness aspect of it. Because people go to physical therapy and don't realize that obviously they're going to have that physiological trouble, but they're
Yes.
also going to have that mental trouble that's going to really dictate how the whole journey is going to go in general. So
Yes.
how have you been able to kind of approach that challenge within people? Because you kind of have to guide them through that, right? Guide them how to connect and unlock that power of having the mind-body connection.
Yes, I love that. I think when it comes to stress and mindfulness, I think most people don't understand why it's important to address that piece. And I mentioned it before that when I have somebody who comes in and they say, I've tried all the things, I did all the diagnostic testing and imaging, they ruled out absolutely everything. There's no red flags. They're technically in good health, but they still have all the symptoms. I come back and I level set with the individual and I say, It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to do like talk therapy, for example, because I know a lot of people either are very open to it or very closed, but ultimately anything that is still internalized will present itself as inflammation. Okay. So now a lot of people will say, well, what's so bad about inflammation? Isn't inflammation good? Some people don't even know what inflammation is because we can't see it, right? Same thing, cut my finger, I'm going to bleed, it's going to get red, it's going to get hot. And then there's a process there for it to get to heal.
Mhm.
Now, when we talk about stress, though, there's none of that, right? And so education is more important than anything else because until people understand that they are living in stress, right? Most people won't address it. They won't do anything about it until then it turns to, long-term unaddressed stress turns to something physical.
Right.
So the problem with inflammation is that there's three phases, if you will. And the first phase, it's the typical, okay, something's happened. The body's going, okay, get it under control, right? So it's going to make sure that if it's a physical, it's different. But let's just say it's going to act, it's going to initiate the process, and it's going good. When inflammation becomes a real problem is because that response to the inflammation is just flatlining, if you will, but it stays constant and it doesn't initiate the last phase, which is the phase that is needed for the body to actually go into recovery. So at the beginning, it's addressing, it's going to go to the sites where it feels the inflammation is. The macrophages will go, it will remove all the junk so that it can start the healing. But as we get older, the modulators that are needed, so the SPMs, are less as we get older. And so they don't actually initiate that recovery phase. And that's the problem with the inflammation is that when you're too long in that little response, that low grade inflammatory response, and you're not initiating recovery, that's when it becomes a problem. And it really all it's doing then at that point is your nervous system isn't able to come down, i.e., the immune system, right? Because that's the system that's going to trigger all of this. So if that system doesn't get the chance to finally come down from constantly being on, that's when it becomes a problem. And so coming back to the nervous system, what rebounding will do is it automatically regulates the nervous system. So yes, it could be, yes, you're working really, really hard, but this is what the studies show and why it's so successful for neurodivergent individuals, because neurodivergent individuals, not that they can't, but the time that it needs to control the nervous system, it requires more time, more energy, and that in their mind is the mental stress, the mental overload. So if I were to transfer that to anybody, being on a rebounder and just creating that little shake, if you will, calms down naturally the nervous system, your adrenal glands and the adrenal system and everything. Finally get some moment to say, okay, I'm not in stress. There isn't a lion chasing me. And then when the nervous system calms down, then the immune system can go back into recovery and reducing the effects of a long-term inflammatory response. So what else can we do beyond rebounding? And that's a fantastic question because it's really simple. So I don't know if you're familiar with emotional freedom technique, which is shortened by tapping. Um, no, all right.
Tapping. I was like, I've heard a couple, but tapping, I haven't heard about tapping.
So I think tapping is very underrated, but if we look at what it's supposed to do, there's specific points that follow again the meridian point. So again, it's not new. We're just looking at the research to how it helps calm the nervous system. And so in hindsight, rebounding is constant repetition of movements up and down.
Mhm.
Okay.
Right.
That being done, it could look like a shake. Amazing. But what tapping does is I'm focusing on initiating a movement, repetitive movement on certain points. So, if it's the collarbone is an easy one for people to remember. It could be the inside of your thumb as well. But that consistent, repetitive movement will then also regulate your nervous system. And now you're functioning from, instead of functioning at 100 all the time and being on, it will lower and then you can function at a 50% or maybe a 0%. Now, I'm oversimplifying it, but everyone should look into EFT. also
Mhm.
known as tapping. And then you can tap into those points. And so you can deepen every single time the moment becomes way too stressful, it will reduce more and more of the body's response in terms of stress. Now, again, if your body thinks your bottle is a lion, even though it's not, it's a bottle, that is the importance of the mind, what you tell yourself. So you can incorporate, some people will call them mantras, some people will just be like, I know I can do this. This is my body's
The
way
good
of
affirmations.
stress.
Yeah.
I know I'm safe. I know and you repeat it and you keep going until you feel like, oh, wait a minute, I feel calmer. And
Mhm.
then you act from a place of calmness.
Yeah.
Another very easy way, a lot of, breath work.
Yeah.
Being able to really move your diaphragm,
Mhm.
a lot of, unfortunately, the way society is built and the stressors, just the daily stressors, right? Whether they're financial, whether it's with your career or not, um, the body isn't breathing enough. And
Mhm.
so if your body isn't receiving enough oxygen, and that's your basic survival tool, then it's the same thing as you're panting, right? There's a line. So your body's going. So what happens? You don't get enough oxygen to circulate within the brain. And that is a low grade amount of inflammation in the body as well. So breath work, yes, people say, yes, I know it's obvious, but most people, when you look at them, they're breathing like this, right?
Right.
And like
Right.
their shoulders aren't down, but it's not a posture thing. It really is, do we get to mobilize the diaphragm enough to do the expansion within our thoracic cage to make room for the oxygen to enter in and out of the lungs. So breath work is super important. And then the last tip would be some sort of, I don't want to call it meditation because I think everybody, once you say meditation, everyone goes, whoop, nope, not my jam. I'm not doing it. But again, it's just being mindful, giving
Mhm.
yourself a second where life gets to go out and it's just you turning inwards. To me, it still means the same thing. Focus on your breathing. Some people do it through yoga. I was one of those people who thought that I can't do yoga. There's no way, if I'm not like the heavy gain person, this doesn't work for me. And I
Mhm.
remember going into my very first session and I did one. I'm going, okay, well, everybody's doing this. And I'm going, oh, I could do this too. I can hold a pose. This is great. Did it another time and I'm going, okay, but what am I supposed to feel? Like, what am I supposed to be feeling? How long does it take before I'm great? And then I'm going, and her response to me, which I loved, was the goal isn't to be perfect. The goal is a constant work on your breathing. And so
Mhm.
when you're in a difficult pose, can you stay? Can you clear your mind and just turn in with your breathing? So that gives you the strength to go through a pose. And then I said, oh, that's interesting. Let me try that approach. And it was like my me discovering that I'm an inner yogi. Nor did I didn't know, but then I started and I'm going, oh wait, I think I need a yoga session because yes, focus on your breathing and then all of a sudden you're going, okay, your movement is supposed to be as fluid as your breath work, right? And so once I made that connection and realized, oh my goodness, I've been doing it all wrong, I realized the practice is in the breathing, not the perfection, not about improving your poses, but are you able to connect your breath work when you're in these positions? Because the second your body has to hold on and do something uncomfortable, what happens?
The breathing goes crazy. The breathing stops
It
completely.
stops, right?
Yeah.
So that approach, and then going, oh, that makes so much sense. I said, the only time that you're going to actually stop breathing, unfortunately, is when you're dead. So the process is the same thing for self-healing and anybody who decides to embark on this journey. It's not a question of when am I going to be done? You're constantly growing through different things because there's different seasons, there's different life challenges, and the goal is my body okay to carry me through these life changes? And if so, consider your body balanced and where you need it to be. The time that it can't carry you through, that's when you know your nervous system has been overly taxed. There's underlying stress to address. And I always tell people look at your sleep. If your sleep is not good, whether it's because you can sleep 20 hours and wake up and never feel energized, or just knowing that you have disturbed sleep. It's your body's way of saying, hey, by the way, time to check in. My nervous system is not regulating on its own. And so that's how I would simplify stress and inflammation and helping people understand. Don't wait for a sign.
Mm.
It's not, unless you know what it's like to turn inwards, don't wait for the sign. But sleep would be the first one to tell you, oh my goodness, what's going on? And if you know you live a high stress life, chances are it's a fantastic way to start to incorporate. And it doesn't, I only mentioned a few, but some people explore Reiki or sound healing or light therapy. These are all different ways that you can introduce them into your lifestyle or daily routine so that you can have a better fighting chance for your nervous system to regulate at all phases of life.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why when you asked about the ETF and the tapping, I was like, tapping I haven't heard of, but breathing, many breathing methods I've always known are super, super crucial to one's well-being. Like being able to,
100%.
again, I think that is the first trigger that goes from the mind-body connection. It's like if you learn how to breathe, and most
Yes.
people do believe that they know how to breathe, and it's like, no, not there yet. You know, you're on the right path, but you do need a little more something. It is eye-opening how much power your own body already has. And I think
Yeah,
that's like something that's so beautiful about clinics that share and empower mindfulness. It's like, it's almost a partnership, right? You can come in and I'll show you what to do, but at the end of the day, I'm kind of guiding you through how to unlock that inner power within your body and just reattach those two connections.
correct. And I love the way that you put it. It's exactly that. It's come back to yourself. And when you really pour inwards, you will feel happy. You will feel fulfilled, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Because I think with society today, we look for these quick fixes, right? That it's the dopamine fix, and more and more we learn about ADHD or neurodivergent individuals. It is a neurotransmitter that is missing. So you don't get motivated. And I have two things. I always tell people the psychological theory behind motivation on paper looks great. But once you start working with people, you realize I can't get somebody to do something to start the motivation or the behavioral change to input the motivation, right? They go hand in hand. So really, I always say that what people think they're going to feel inside to become motivated, it doesn't exist in
Mhm.
hindsight, right? You
Mhm.
have to start some sort of pattern, routine, behavioral change within yourself, and then you can slowly start to see some sort of change, and then you get motivated, right? But just to be like, all right, I'm here, I'm motivated. If you keep waiting for it, it is going to be a hard feat. And I think that's ultimately my biggest challenge. But once somebody sees some sort of result, right? Again, I don't ask people to run a marathon. It's small changes that are sustainable, realistic. And when they see a change, then they're motivated forever. They will continue to turn in, pour into themselves, do their work because they are genuinely happy. They found a purpose. They know what they're waking up for. But if you're constantly in a rut or depressed, and mental wellness, when I say mindfulness, it's also to take off that label and the stigma that we have behind mental health.
I
I
love that.
like I don't want to, I'm not here to sugarcoat it, but ultimately, whether someone identifies and says that they're depressed, stressed, anxious, all the labels that we have, but at the end of the day, if someone is in that very dark place, it's hard, and it's not because they don't have the motivation to do it. Their brain chemistry is not allowing them to do it,
Mhm.
and so that approach has to look very different if I'm expecting my client to come back,
Right.
right?
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
it's an honest conversation to have with people, because if they've tried everything, they've done everything, but they've never started there, that's when the key starts to unlock and they start to have results.
There you go. Tamara, you're really touching on the patient retention kind of side of things, right? Like patient retention at this point, you have to understand your generation, who we're dealing with, right? And a
Yeah.
lot of us are, how do you say, we don't have the longest extension span or yeah, attention span. And when it comes to our own rehab or our own programs that we actually want to get through and complete 100%, if we don't see that instant gratification or that instant like, oh yes, this is working, it's going to be really hard for us to keep going. And that's a mental battle within itself. So along with, trying to teach these people how to be mindful and try to breathe, taking the breathing or tap works, what other challenges are you coming across with patient retention of how to kind of keep them or what's, continue to also work outside of that?
Great question. I'm gonna start because we ended on the mindfulness piece,
Yeah.
but I come from a world where majority of my clients have seen all the doctors,
Hmm.
have tried literally everything, and still in pain.
Hmm.
So most of the times it's even if I wanted to rely on word of mouth, it's great. They'll tell you there's a method to her madness. It works. Go see her. But they can never translate what I'm doing
Right,
because
of
it's a
course.
very individualized, personalized approach based on where that person is right now. And because of that, it's hard to say word of mouth because if you're person A and person B, and I'm sharing my experience, and that person doesn't see their problem in your experience,
They're not going to
they
want
won't
to
come through
go.
the door.
Yeah, exactly. They're like, well,
They
that's not
really
actually
won't
what
come
I
through the
need.
door. Or they'll come
Like,
through the door and they'll be like, what is she talking about all these different things? She's not touching my shoulder. It's my shoulder that hurts. And I'm going, yeah, but you've been dealing with this problem for so long. So I'm not going to go back and touch the shoulder where you've already done everything. It's clear that it's somewhere else. So
right.
when I look at retention, it's also about identifying who your target audience is. Huge, right? Everybody, and especially in manual therapy, in this world that we live in, whether it's somebody who's a independent practitioner or self-employed, it's very easy to think that X number of clients means X amount of revenue, meaning I delivered. In hindsight, if we were to take a step back, if I open the door and say, okay, I work on everybody, every case, every scenario, it's going, okay, it looks like from a marketing perspective, a marketing disaster, right? And
Right.
it's going, okay,
Exactly.
but like, who's your audience? No, it's for everybody. And I think once you keep doing that a few times, you're going, no, but it's not for everybody. Who are the people who are, regardless of what you tell them, they are ready to show up right now. They're ready to put in the work, regardless of what that looks like. That I think the number one thing is who's your services that you know for sure. If you target this group of people, without fail, you constantly get somebody. Now, if those people bring in additional people, amazing. It might open a new segment, right? As you notice, wait, there's a need for another segment. Then you get to open another one. But the very first one is who are my services for? That's the very number one. Two, once they're there, what are the things that keep them coming back? So, like you said, the attention span nowadays, it comes back down to technology. Everybody has a phone, somebody has a tablet. Doesn't even matter if they're young or old, right? Everybody has that as a means to communicate, keep in touch, you name it.
Right.
So, utilize technology in a sense of what is a tool that will make us stand out. So we
Mhm.
brought in the Fit 3D machine here at our center because when we say it's a personalized approach, well, at least if somebody can see concretely all their baseline metrics, so, yes, the body fat, the weight, the percentage, the muscle mass, great. There's something that they can see. The data doesn't lie, right?
Right.
So when
They
they
can see
say,
their progress.
progress is super important because if you can't measure the progress, or if you're starting any program and you didn't set any baseline metrics, how are
Mhm.
you going to go back and measure to say that there's a change? And the first thing that's going to come up is this doesn't work, nothing has changed. And I'm going, okay, cool. Let's take a look. Symptoms, easy. We can address those right away. But physical, people want to see physical changes. And the Fit 3D machine allows us to deliver a 3D posture assessment in three different views. So, when people are like, you think mindfulness and breathing is going to help my body? Well, start a program
And you see,
and look,
yeah, look,
right?
it's right here. Yes, it does.
Here we go. And I tell people, sometimes they're going, oh, you think I just need to drink water? Yeah, you're dehydrated. Cool. 2 weeks later, they'll be like, but I really didn't do anything. I said, yeah, but you drank water. Great. The machine will come back and show zero changes in the weight, zero changes in the body fat, but the visual, the 3D image, huge, because right away I could see their body changing. The inflammation changes. I can't measure inflammation physically, and even if we tried, it still requires a blood test. We need CPR markers to identify where inflammation is being held. So again, if somebody didn't have access to that, at least when you come, we have your baseline metrics. My trained osteopath eyes can see, but look at the difference. Look at the
Right.
way even your stomach has shrunken, and then we can go look at measurements and see. But it's the first thing visually, because I know people are going to say, wait a minute, nothing has changed. But when I put it and I can compare the historical data from day one up until any scans, and I just say drink water, well, now, oh, wow, look at this. I can physically see a difference. And then that alone just gets people to be like, okay, wait a minute, this could work. Retention, not a problem.
Right. They're like, I'm
People
coming back. I'm like, when's the next time I can get back
people
in?
want to see a change, and at least I could say, okay, yes, it's a process, but at the same time, after one or two, let's call it, we start with the physical treatment. At least if you know, if I can find a physical point that is inflamed or has an inflammation point or is discomfort to their body, and then they come back and there's some sort of change, there has to be some sort of change. When a client's here on my table, I have 45 minutes and they need to see something, right?
Right. Right.
So retention really is, it's one of those pieces is that. Another part that we do is the community aspect. I
Mm.
mean, like, yes, if you're great, you're going to go to the gym, no problem. You've never had an injury, all that fun stuff. That's great until you need that, right? And I think this is where we see the changes in the needs as at different age groups, right? And if you've lived an injury, there's a difference between going to a gym and training versus knowing that you have somebody who can give you corrections, ensure that things are not hurting, or putting you at risk to injure, right? And so the community, the sense of community here is you need that to thrive. You need to have some sort of call it social life, social interaction, engagement, for the betterment of your mental health, right? When we went through the pandemic, what we all saw was everybody in outrage when they told us, no, you're on a curfew, or you can't leave, or you can't have big group gatherings. But ultimately, everybody was upset because what their body was really missing was social interaction.
Right.
So having a community where it's not just I go through the gym and I come back, there's gyms set up like that everywhere. You can have like really low enrollments or memberships, but ultimately it's, if that person comes or not, do they remember to cancel their membership versus, wait, somebody's expecting me to show up, right? It's
Right.
accountability from A to Z. If there's
Right.
no accountability and there's no way to hold somebody accountable, then their motivation is gone. And this is why working with a personal trainer or somebody like that, it's just not long-term feasible in terms of cost. But if I had a community and I showed up, I even in training together, there's a lot of energy being exchanged that you walk in and you're like, man, I don't really want this, or I can't get through that last rep, and everyone's there cheering you on, and you have, somebody who's 16 in a class, somebody who's 70 years old in a class, or you have a 40-year-old in the class. Everyone's still doing the same thing and powering through. The adjustments look different, but ultimately no one is looking and saying, oh my God, I can't do this. If anything, they're saying, man, if that person can do it, I can also do it.
Yeah.
And it's really
Exactly.
like, if a 70-year-old can do it, a 16-year-old, there's nowhere to say it's because of age, it's because of physical disability.
Mhm.
Everybody in our even classes at this point or in our community is at the same level.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
That's
that
how we
energy
see them.
sharing. That's that
That's
energy.
how we see it.
Mm-hmm. Especially when your energy is sharing and you just know that group of people, they're gonna go and they're getting better. They're like, you're not here, you're not getting better today then. And that's always gonna
Almost,
get the
right?
results.
It's a huge part. And then the last part, and then coming back to our classes, we do a very focused heart rate monitoring. Again, it's personal. Again, I don't expect somebody in two classes, they might look like they're the same, but one's at a different capacity than the other. Again, I need to work so that it makes sense for where that person is. So even heart rate training, very personalized, and we can coach people to notice when their cardiovascular or VO2 max has improved, how long it takes to recover after, you know, high intensity workout, or how long it takes for your heart rate to go to a certain level and then come back down. All different ways that we can monitor, measure, track, and when we're plateauing, we adjust right away. So it also allows those two technology tools, if you will, makes allows so that the client, patient, the individual it's themselves don't have to wait 3 months out and be like, oh wow, it's really not working. The second we notice that you're plateauing or the muscle mass, there's a way for us to address it, whether it's through nutrition, maybe it is a treatment, maybe it is from, as an osteo, I can understand everything metabolic, what is not, um call it metabolizing the sugar, the fats, or the protein in your body, right? So all these things, again, data doesn't lie. So it will give us the information. Now the question is, it has to fall in the hands of somebody who can understand the data and make sense of it all together. And I like to say that this is why I'm the unique unicorn that can make sense out of things that don't make sense to anybody else, but understanding the relationships in the body and how different things are tied, I ultimately would say is how we retain a lot of our clients. There's a lot of trust between us and our clients. They understand that if Tamara or somebody on our team recommends X, Y, and Z, they know that we have a team that was built specifically community. Do they practice what they preach?
Mhm.
But also skilled individuals who can understand and, or if not, intercommunicate to build something more concrete for that individual. But nobody gets to go rogue.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that was great advice already, but let me give you one more chance to say if you had any advice to other clinic owners, founders along those lines, what do you think is the best advice that you could give them to kind of oversee all of that?
I would definitely say know your competitors. What are other clinics already doing? And understand where there's room for you to be different. If you haven't identified that unique trait or what makes people come back, survey your clients. Understand what makes them come back. For anybody who says no or does not return or cancels and doesn't rebook, is an opportunity for the owner or the practitioner to go back and say, but why?
Hmm. Hmm.
I like to say that nothing is negative feedback. Even a no is good information, but don't take that no and close the door and move forward. You're leaving a lot of viable information on the table to um, help your clients, but also yourself. And so I would end and say, find the unique value that you can bring that is not already being done. Is it an additional service? Service means you still have to pay somebody. But if you were to think about how can you be making money while you're sleeping, if you will, it's going to come down to the latest technology. So make it easy for your clients, make it super transparent, but make sure for them they see the added value. They will pay for any added value if it makes sense to them. If they don't see themselves in your clinic, that means you're still not marketing the right target audience. So I think those are the two key things that I've learned personally, and take yourself out of being, my services are for everybody. They could work on everybody, but I don't market to everybody because that is very costly. But once you know exactly who's always saying yes in terms of your target audience, follow it there, take it there, and look at your competitors. How do you make yourself different from them?
I love that. I love that. And to piggyback off that one more time, if you would say either in your company and also what others should actually improve and make sure they close in on in terms of their aspect of their clinics, whether that be through increasing revenue, greater efficiency, reducing costs, what way do you think is going to be the best way to enhance their performance?
Automate.
I like that. I knew
Automate
it.
your
I was like,
operations. I must say, like, yes, I did come from that background, so it was a no-brainer for me. But if you can automate your operations where you don't necessarily even have to find somebody to do a certain task, but just automate it, you save all the time. So I know a lot of people are thinking about like virtual assistants or, call systems that will take the calls when you're sleeping. those are the things that you need to look at, because you don't always want to be working on your business or in your business. You also want to, if you had to remove yourself from those two, what would the business look like? Technology will automate a lot of those things, and you won't have to necessarily bring in additional people to account for the tasks that you have to do.
Absolutely. I love that so much. Thank you, Tamara, for being on. That's a wrap for today's episode. A huge thank you once again, Tamara Williams, for sharing your valuable insights. If you'd like
Thank
to
you.
learn more about Energetic Wellness Center, head over to their website or connect with them on their social media. That will all be linked below.
Having me. Love it.
We'll see you on the next episode of Next Patient.